The green light painted circles in the dark. Around and around it swept, a thin luminous arm tracing the edge of a glass screen no larger than a dinner plate. Seaman Tommy Reese watched it spin, his eyes burning from hours of concentration, his back aching from the cramped metal stool bolted to the deck. The Combat Information Center of USS Montpelier smelled of sweat and electrical heat, and the coffee that kept men awake through watches that never seemed to end. It was November 2, 1943. Somewhere above Tommy's head, 14,000 Marines slept in foxholes on Bougainville, their first night on enemy soil. Task Force 39 had delivered them safely to Cape Torokina, and now 4 cruisers and 8 destroyers held station in Empress Augusta Bay, waiting for the Japanese response that everyone knew was coming. Tommy was 19 years old. 6 months ago, he had been stocking shelves at his father's hardware store in Marion, Ohio. Now he sat in a steel room buried in the guts of a light cruiser, watching a machine that could see through darkness. The SG radar was new technology, barely understood even by the officers who relied upon it. Its green sweep revealed the world in phantom shapes, painting contacts as bright blips against a darker background. Tommy had learned to read these ghosts like a hunter reads tracks in snowed at AT-0227. The sweep caught something. Tommy leaned forward, his heart suddenly loud in his ears. The blip was faint, almost invisible against the electronic noise that cluttered the screen's edge. But it was there. He watched the sweep come around again. The blip remained, stronger now. Then another appeared beside it. Then another. Radar contact, Tommy called out, his voice cracking despite his efforts to sound calm. Multiple surface contacts, bearing 320, range 35,000 yards. The CIC erupted into controlled chaos. Officers crowded around the plotting table while Tommy continued his count. 6 contacts. 8. 10. They materialized like spirits summoned from the darkness, a fleet emerging from nothing into cold electronic certainty. The report reached Rear Admiral Aaron Merrill on the bridge within 60 seconds. Merrill was a Tennessee gentleman with 30 years of naval service, a man whose calm demeanor had earned him the nickname, Tip, for his habit of never showing his hand until the moment of decision. He received the contact report without visible reaction, but his mind was already racing through calculations of speed, bearing, and time. The Japanese were coming. Just as they had come to Savo Island 15 months earlier, when they caught the Allied fleet sleeping and sank 4 heavy cruisers in less than an hour. That disaster still haunted the Navy. Merrill had studied every report, every testimony, every lesson written in the blood of 1,000 American sailors. He would not repeat those mistakes. Sound general quarters, he ordered. All ships prepare to engage. Throughout the task force, alarm bells shattered the tropical night. Sailors tumbled from bunks and sprinted to battle stations. Gun crews yanked covers from weapons and loaded shells into hoists. In engine rooms, throttles opened wide as cruisers worked up to flank speed. The choreography of war unfolded in darkness, guided by training so ingrained that men could perform it in their sleep. In the CIC, Tommy tracked the approaching enemy with growing dread. The Japanese formation was splitting, spreading into 3 columns that would soon bracket the American position. He recognized the tactic from intelligence briefings. The enemy would try to catch them in a crossfire of torpedoes, the devastating Type 93 weapons that American sailors called long lances. One hit from a long lance could break a cruiser's back, but the Japanese did not know they had been seen. Their own radar was primitive, their operators poorly trained. They approached through darkness that they believed hid them completely, confident in skills perfected through years of night fighting exercises. They expected to achieve surprise. They were wrong. Admiral Merrill made his decision. He would not wait for visual contact, would not close to the knife-fighting ranges where Japanese torpedoes held the advantage. He would fight at distance, using radar to guide his guns, trusting machines over human eyes for the first time in naval history. Signal to Burke, Merrill ordered. Destroyers attack. Cruisers will engage at maximum radar range. Captain Arleigh Burke received the order aboard USS Charles Osborne and felt something close to joy. This was the moment he had trained for, argued for, believed in despite the skepticism of officers who trusted only what they could see. His 8 destroyers would race north to intercept, launch torpedoes at the enemy flanks, then clear the way for the cruiser's guns. The green ghosts on Tommy Rees's screen began to move. Friendly and enemy, predator and prey, all converging on a patch of dark water where history would be decided. Tommy watched them close, unable to tell which blips carried men who would live and which carried men who would die. The Battle of Empress Augusta Bay had begun. The darkness over the Solomon Sea was absolute, a blackness so complete that Lieutenant Commander Kenji Hasegawa could not see his own hand when he held it before his face. He stood on the bridge of the light cruiser Sendai, straining his eyes toward a horizon that did not exist, searching for enemies he knew must be near but could not find. Sendai was old. Launched in 1923, she had served the Emperor for 20 years, her 7 14-centimeter guns and 16 torpedoes making her a formidable leader of destroyer squadrons. Tonight she sailed at the head of 3 destroyers, the left column of Vice Admiral Sentaro Omori's striking force. Their mission was simple: reach Empress Augusta Bay, destroy the American transports, slaughter the Marines on the beach. Repeat the victory of Savo Island. Prove that Japan still ruled the Pacific. Night, Hasegawa had been at Pearl Harbor. He remembered the pride of that morning, the sight of American battleships burning, the certainty that the Western powers were soft and weak and would soon surrender. 2 years later, that certainty had crumbled. Guadalcanal had fallen. The Americans had learned to fight. Somewhere in the darkness ahead, they waited with ships that Hasegawa could not see. The Type 21 radar set in Sendai's plotting room offered little help. Japanese radar technology lagged far behind the Americans, and the operators assigned to work the equipment had received only rudimentary training. The screen showed mostly static, with occasional phantom returns that might be islands or clouds or simply electronic ghosts. Hasegawa had learned not to trust it. Instead, he trusted his eyes. The Imperial Navy had trained him since childhood to see in darkness, to pick out the silhouettes of ships against faintly lighter skies, to read wave patterns and wake disturbances that revealed hidden vessels. These were the skills that had made Japan's night fighting forces the terror of the Pacific. Tonight, those skills found nothing. Aboard the heavy cruiser Myoko, Vice Admiral Omori paced his bridge with growing unease. His force was powerful: 2 heavy cruisers with 8-inch guns, 2 light cruisers, 6 destroyers, nearly 100 torpedoes ready for launch. But the fleet had been assembled hastily, ships thrown together from whatever was available at Rabaul. Many had never trained together. Communications between columns relied on blinker lights that could reveal position to the enemy. AT-0130, a floatplane from the cruiser Haguro reported American ship somewhere to the south. The position was vague, the identification uncertain. Omori adjusted course, but he was navigating by guesswork, drawing lines on charts based on information that might already be obsolete. What Omori did not know was that the Americans had been tracking his every movement for over an hour. Their radar painted his formation with perfect clarity, updating his position every few seconds. While he groped through darkness, they watched him in greenlit certainty. On Sendai's bridge, Rear Admiral Matsuji Ijuin felt the wrongness in his bones. A veteran of countless night actions, Ijuin possessed an instinct for danger that had kept him alive through battles that killed lesser men. Something was different tonight. The darkness felt hostile in a way he could not explain. He requested permission to launch torpedoes immediately, before closing further with the enemy. The long lance could kill from 20,000 meters, far beyond the range of American weapons. Strike first, strike hard, then fade into the night before the enemy could respond. Omori refused. The formation must hold. They would close to visual range before attacking, as Japanese doctrine demanded. Ijuin accepted the decision with the discipline of a lifetime. A samurai obeyed his lord, even unto death. But as he stared into the impenetrable blackness ahead, he felt the presence of enemies he could not see, could not find, could not fight. AT-0239, Sendai's lookouts finally spotted something: dark shapes against darker water, the unmistakable silhouettes of ships racing toward them from the east. Destroyers, moving fast, already impossibly close. The warning came too late. Even as Ijuin shouted orders to turn, to launch torpedoes, to prepare for combat, the first American shells were already in flight. Four cruisers had opened fire simultaneously, their guns aimed by radar with a precision no human eye could match. The first salvo struck Sendai like a hammer blow from the gods. Shells tore through her superstructure, started fires in her ammunition hoists, jammed her rudder hard to port. She began to circle helplessly, a wounded animal in a sea of predators. Hasegawa was thrown to the deck by the impact. When he rose, blood streaming from a gash on his forehead, he saw flames consuming the bridge. Through the smoke, he glimpsed the impossible, American ships barely visible against the horizon, firing with devastating accuracy at targets they could not possibly see. Then he understood. The Americans had found a way to see through darkness. The night that had protected Japan's fleet for 2 years of war had turned traitor. The invisible had become visible, the samurai had been struck blind. The deck of USS Charles Osborne trembled like a living thing as her engines drove her north at flank speed. Captain Arleigh Burke stood at the bridge rail, spray lashing his face, watching the darkness ahead with the hungry eyes of a predator finally released to hunt. Burke was 42 years old, a Colorado farm boy who had clawed his way into the Naval Academy and spent 2 decades preparing for this moment. His destroyer Squadron 23, the Little Beavers, was racing toward a Japanese force that outgunned them 3-1. 8 destroyers against 2 heavy cruisers, 2 light cruisers, and 6 enemy destroyers. The mathematics of the engagement were suicidal. Burke did not care about mathematics. He cared about torpedoes. His ships carried the Mark 15 torpedo, a weapon that could kill cruisers if fired from close range. The Japanese carried the Long Lance, which could kill from twice as far. The entire battle would turn on who struck first, who closed fastest, who held nerve longest in the racing darkness. AT-0246, Burke's lead division reached attack position. The radar showed Japanese ships 12,000 yards ahead, still unaware of the American approach. Burke raised his hand, held it for 1 heartbeat, then brought it down. Torpedoes away. 25 Mark 15 torpedoes leaped from their tubes, their compressed air launches hissing into the night. They spread in a fan across the dark water, racing toward the Japanese column at 45 knots. Burke held his breath, counting seconds, waiting for the flash of detonations that would signal hits. The seconds stretched into a minute. Then 2. Nothing. The Japanese had turned at the last moment, some combination of luck and instinct warning them of danger they could not see. The torpedoes passed through empty water, their propellers churning uselessly toward a horizon where no targets remained. Burke slammed his fist against the bridge rail. He had one chance, and he had missed. Now the Japanese knew they were under attack. Now the element of surprise was gone. Then Admiral Merrill's cruisers opened fire. Fire Controlman James Red McGrath stood at his station aboard USS Spence, the second ship in Burke's trailing division. He was 22, a former minor league pitcher from St. Louis who had discovered that calculating torpedo lead angles was not so different from calculating curves to batters. Both required predicting where a target would be, not where it was. When the cruisers began shooting, the night exploded into chaos. Red watched through his scope as shells streaked overhead, their tracers drawing lines of fire across the sky. The Japanese formation shattered under the bombardment. Through his scope, he saw Sendai stagger and begin to burn, her steering destroyed, her guns falling silent one by one. Then the collisions began. The Japanese, blinded by the darkness and confused by the sudden attack, began crashing into each other. The destroyers Samidare and Shiratsuyu collided while trying to evade American shells. The heavy cruiser Myoko, flagship of the enemy force, sliced directly into the destroyer Hatsuke's, shearing off her bow in a screech of tearing steel. Red watched the disaster unfold on his radar scope. The neat columns of the Japanese formation dissolved into scattered blips, each one fleeing in a different direction. This was his moment. His division was racing into the chaos, closing to point-blank range where even hasty torpedo shots could not miss. "Torpedo officer, you have a solution," his captain called. "Fire when ready." Red made his final calculations, adjusted for the target's desperate evasive maneuvers, and squeezed the firing key. 4 torpedoes dropped from Spence's tubes and raced toward the crippled Hatsuke's. Aboard USS Foot, disaster struck without warning. A long lance from Sendai's final desperate salvo found its mark, striking the destroyer's stern with the force of a thunderbolt. The explosion killed 13 men instantly and tore away the rudder, leaving Foote spinning helplessly in circles. Her division commander, Bernard Austin, faced an impossible choice. Stop to help and become sitting targets for Japanese torpedoes. Continue the attack and abandon wounded brothers to the dark sea. Austin's voice came over the radio, steady despite the horror of the moment. Continue attack. Foote can take care of herself. The destroyers raced past their stricken sister, leaving her crew to fight flooding and fire alone. There would be time for rescue later, if any of them survived. Burke's destroyers plunged into the heart of the enemy formation. At ranges measured in hundreds of yards, they fired everything they had. Red McGrath's torpedoes found Hatsuke's and finished what Myoko's collision had started. The destroyer's magazines detonated in a pillar of flame visible for miles. WWII-0330, it was over. Vice Admiral Omori, convinced he had sunk multiple American cruisers, ordered withdrawal. He had sunk nothing. He had lost Sendai, still burning as she sank beneath the waves. He had lost Hatsuke's, blown apart by American torpedoes. Half his remaining ships were damaged, limping north toward Rabaul. Burke wanted to pursue. Every instinct screamed to chase the fleeing enemy and finish the destruction. But Merrill ordered him back. Dawn was coming, and with it Japanese aircraft that would turn hunters into prey. The little beavers turned south, leaving the burning sea behind them. They had won. They had proven that courage and radar and 31 knots could defeat superior numbers in the dark, but the cost was not yet counted. The first light of November 2, 1943, revealed a sea that refused to show what had happened upon it. The water lay flat and calm, impossibly peaceful, colored the soft gray of pre-dawn. Scattered across its surface floated the debris of destroyed ships, wooden planks, cork life rings, oil slicks that spread in rainbow patterns across the gentle swells. Somewhere beneath those patterns, men were still dying in flooded compartments, their screams unheard, their prayers unanswered. Seaman Tommy Rees climbed topside as the sun rose, his first breath of fresh air in nearly 20 hours. His eyes burned from staring at the radar scope. His hands trembled from exhaustion and cold coffee. He found a spot near the rail and watched the light spread across the ocean, painting the water in shades of gold and rose that seemed to mock the violence of the night that he had helped kill a ship. Perhaps too. He had tracked the Japanese formation on his screen, reported their movements, guided American guns to their targets. The green blips that vanished from his display were men like himself, boys from farms and cities who had families waiting for letters that would never arrive. Tommy knew he should feel something about this. Pride, perhaps, or guilt, or the grim satisfaction of victory. Instead, he felt only numbness, a hollow space where emotion should have been 0.3 miles to the east. USS Foote drifted with her stern blown away. Her crew had fought through the night to keep her afloat, plugging holes, pumping water, cutting loose wreckage that threatened to drag her under. 13 men lay dead in her after compartments, killed instantly by the long lance that found them in the darkness. Their bodies would be recovered later, wrapped in canvas, weighted with shell casings, slipped over the side with prayers and rifle volleys. The destroyer Charles Osborne approached slowly, her crew preparing tow lines. Burke himself stood at the rail, watching his wounded sister ship with eyes that showed no triumph. He had won the battle, but Foote's dead would not share the victory. Far to the north, Rear Admiral Matsuji Aijuin clung to a piece of wreckage, surrounded by the surviving crew of Sendai. The light cruiser had burned for 2 hours before slipping beneath the waves, her captain going down with her in the tradition of the service. Aijuin had abandoned ship only when ordered by Commander Shoji himself, his last command to his subordinate before the flames consumed the bridge. Now Aijuin floated in water still warm from the fires, watching the American fleet steam south. He had fought in a dozen night actions, had won victories that made his name legendary in the Imperial Navy. Last night, he had been beaten by an enemy he never saw, killed by guns that found him through darkness no human eye could penetrate. The samurai code demanded that he die with his ship. Instead, he lived, bobbing in the wreckage of everything he believed about war. The Japanese submarine Ro. 104 would find him in 2 days, rescue 75 survivors from the water. 184 of Sendai's crew would not be found. They would remain forever in the black depths off Bougainville, their bones slowly dissolving into the coral sand. Aboard Montpellier, Admiral Merrill compiled his battle reports with the methodical precision that defined his command. The numbers were stark in their finality. American casualties, 19 killed, 26 wounded. Japanese casualties, at least 200 dead, possibly as many as 600. 1 enemy light cruiser sunk. 1 destroyer sunk. Multiple ships damaged, including a heavy cruiser that would require months to repair. More importantly, the Marines on Bougainville were safe. The Japanese had failed to reach the beachhead, failed to destroy the transports, failed to replay the massacre of Savo Island. The landing would proceed. The airfields would be built. The noose around Rabaul would tighten until the great Japanese base strangled on its own isolation. Merrill allowed himself a moment of quiet satisfaction, then returned to his planning. The war would not wait for celebrations. In 3 days, Japanese aircraft from Rabaul would try to destroy his task force. American carriers would respond by raiding the harbor itself, the first carrier strike against that fortress since the war began. The Battle of Empress Augusta Bay was merely the opening act in a campaign that would grind on for months. In the Combat Information Center, Tommy Reese wrote a letter to his father that he would never send. He tried to explain what had happened, tried to put into words the strange disconnection of fighting a battle through a machine, of killing men reduced to glowing dots on a glass screen. His father had served on destroyers in the last war, had fought at ranges where you could see the enemy's face, smell the cordite, hear the screams. Tommy's war was different. It was clean and distant and abstract, until you climbed topside and saw the oil slick spreading across the morning sea. The letter rambled, circled back on itself, never quite captured the truth Tommy was trying to express. Finally, he crumpled it and threw it away. Some experiences existed beyond the reach of words. The sun rose higher, burning away the mist, revealing an empty ocean that held its secrets in the depths. Task Force 39 formed up and headed south, leaving behind the ghosts of the night. Somewhere beneath the waves, Sendai settled into her final resting place, her guns silenced, her crew scattered, her defeat marking the end of an era. The Japanese would never again dominate the Pacific night. Radar had stolen their greatest advantage, turned darkness from ally to enemy. The war that began in surprise at Pearl Harbor would end in the relentless, grinding logic of industrial supremacy and technological innovation. Tonight was proof. On Montpellier's bridge, a sailor hung a small hand-painted sign where the officers could see it. For words that captured everything the battle had proven. Radar don't lie. Neither did the empty sea.